Good day, Ma'am Elenita F. Corteza. I'm Sitiwisa G. Haliluddin from BSED English 1A. And today I'm going to explain or discuss the Week 8 module in Linguistic 2. First is speech community. It's a group of people who share a set of linguistic norms and expectations regarding the use of language. It is a concept mostly associated with social linguistic and anthropological linguistic. So all the people who use and give a language or dialect is called a speech community. A speech community comes to share a specific set of norms for language used through living and interacting together, and a speech community may therefore emerge among groups that interact frequently and share certain norms and ideologies, such as a group can be village, countries, political, or professional communities. Communities with shared interests, hobbies, or lifestyle, or even group or speech communities, as well as speech style and genres, and also known for how and when to speak in a particular ways. Second is linguistic borrowing. In linguistic borrowing, also known as lexical borrowing, is the process by which a word from one language is adapted for use in another. The word that is borrowed is called borrowing, a borrowed word or a loan word, because English has become a source of loan words that many other languages borrow from English. So there are two different types of borrowing. One of them is the borrowing of loan word. Loan word itself is believed to be a borrowing from German Lehnwort. Another one which has been borrowed into English is Superman. So this is another kind of borrowing called loan translation. So loan translation occurs when the elements of the word are directly translated from the loaning language. Next is language contact. It occurs when a speaker of two or more languages or varieties interact and influence each other. So the study of language contact is called contact linguistics. When a speaker of different languages interact closely, it is typically for their languages to influence each other. So language can occur at language borders between ad stratum languages or as the result of migration with an intrusive language acting as either as superstratum or substratum. Next is language registered. It's the skill, formality we use when we write and speak. So when you speak or talk to your boss, doctor, friends, children, or even your pet, when you see it has the difference in how you speak in this situation, is your formally registered. So the term registered also defines the differences between when, why, and how we use formal or informal in our day-to-day life. So these are also sometimes called address registered because we use them to address people in different situations in life as a speaker or writer. They work to increase the variety of the language as well as the appropriate in writing and speaking. Yes. Next is the language shift. It is also known as language transfer or language replacement and language assimilation. It's the process whereby a speech community shifts to a different language, usually over an extended period of time. So, language that are perceived to be higher status is stabilized or spread at the expense of other language that are perceived by their own speaker to be lower status. So, language shift can be understood best as a socially strategy through which individuals and groups compete for positions of prestige, power, and domestic security. Next is the language death. Occurs when a language loses its last native speaker by extension, meaning is when the language is no longer known, including by second language speaker. So, Other similar terms include linguicide, because language that is a process in which level of speech community linguistic competence and the language variety decrease, eventually resulting in no native or fluent speaker of the variety language that can affect any language forms, including dialect language. Last is the social linguistic. It's the study of how language is related to society. So it is also studies how people affect language. Using social linguistic studies how variety and language changes between groups of people because of things such as race, gender, status, and age. So the study of why language changes started during the late 1900 in the wave model. Thomas Cullen Hodgson was the first person to ask World Social Linguistic. It was in an article he wrote in the 1939 called Social Linguistic in India. This was printed in a magazine called Men in India. Sociologists in the West first came in the 1960s. So let's talk about the language and gender of or ethnicity. It is an interdisciplinary field of research that studies varieties of speech and to a lesser content writing in terms of gender relationship, gender practice, and sexuality. So when social linguistic studies differences in the speech of men and women, mostly they are concerned with gender related variability. But nonetheless, let me say a few things about sex related to a variability. This chiefly concerns the fact that statistically speaking, men are a little bit taller and women, and so also their larynxes are larger. This affects the frequency, the pitch with which men and women talk. Men have a fundamental frequency of 80 to 200 Hz, while the women have a fundamental frequency of 120 to 400 Hz. Next is the language and social class. So let us know first what is social class. So social class means layer of a society that is characterized by a specific amount of wealth, prestige, and power. So every society is divided into social classes where societies vary, however, is first of all in the number of social classes and also in the distinct or the degree of the different among the different social classes. But every societies that thus stratify groups of people according to wealth, prestige, and power. So what does social class have to do with language use? Research shows that there are really close connection between our social class and the language choices that we make when we use language. So that mean the people of a specific social class actually develop variations of their language that indicates they belong. Last is the language and power. So we all know what does mean to be politeness, because it's part of our social life, a principle of every interaction, and we encountered it every day, consciously or unconsciously. So politely in linguistic, it can be defined as the ways in which language is employed in a conversations to show consideration for the feelings and desires of one's interlocutors, to create the uphold interpersonal relationship, so-called political behavior, and to comply with the rules for what society or one's culture considers appropriate behavior. Next is the three varieties of Philippines English. First is the Yaya English. A qualification that matter about the features of Yaya English are actually typically of a standard Philippines English. The difference being that errors in standard Philippines English are sporadic and infrequent. So Bautista identified the problem of Yaya English as the fact that its error arise from ignorance of rules. It is also considered as a sparse when the Yaya is forced to use English because her young changes are usually from affluent families that speak English. Second is the bar girl English. Bautista described bar girl English wherein it has the same characteristic of the Yaya English, with the additions of the use of and non-Filipino idiomatic expression. So the girl whose English Bautista described is exactly the bar girls who are conscripted to a service of a serviceman. So these burghers are with little or no education taken from their poor families, often with the promise of education. Their exposures to English is minimal. Next is the colloquial English. So Bautista observed that what she calls the base language is English, but that the symptoms is characteristically Tagalog, predicate plus subject. So other characteristic of colloquial English are frequent insertion of common Tagalog function which particles conjunction, and the use of Tagalog content words and Tagalog exclamative. The colloquial belongs to the higher socio-economic class associated with educated English. So that's all for today, ma'am.